Part 1. The Arrogant Blade. My tongue is insured for $10 million. It is the most valuable tool in the culinary world. But today, I would cut it out of my mouth if it could bring her back. I am Julian, a 3-star Michelin chef. I murdered the only woman who truly loved me. My restaurant was a massive temple of fine dining. Rich politicians and famous movie stars waited months for a single table. I ruled this perfect kitchen with absolute, terrifying power. I believed my hands were touched by God. I thought my sense of taste was completely flawless and invincible. I never listened to anyone. My arrogance was my thickest armor. I screamed at young cooks for tiny mistakes. I threw expensive plates against the white walls. Everyone feared my explosive anger. But the most pathetic person in my kitchen was an old, silent dishwasher. Her name was Clara. Clara was my biological mother. She was a poor, uneducated woman who moved incredibly slowly. She had completely lost her sense of taste many years ago. I forced her to wash dirty pots in the dark corner. I wanted to hide my miserable, poor childhood from the wealthy public. I treated her worse than a stray dog. I constantly insulted her in front of my kitchen staff. I called her a useless, broken machine. I wanted everyone to know that my pure genius came from myself, not from this pathetic woman. She always accepted my cruel words in absolute silence. One busy morning, a special delivery arrived. It was a very rare, incredibly expensive box of white truffles. They were imported for a very important dinner. A powerful food critic was coming to my restaurant. This dinner could make me the most famous chef in the entire world. My sous chef opened the wooden box. He looked at the white mushrooms with deep concern. He touched the surface and smelled them carefully. He nervously told me the truffles felt too soft. He warned me they were expired and smelled slightly sour. He begged me to throw them away. I pushed him aside aggressively. I picked up a truffle and smelled it myself. My arrogant mind immediately rejected his warning. I claimed the strong smell was a sign of deep, complex fermentation. I told him this unique flavor would create the most unforgettable sauce in culinary history. I ordered my staff to prepare the truffles. Clara was washing the floor nearby. She suddenly stopped moving. She smelled the air with wide, terrified eyes. She dropped her dirty towel and ran toward my workstation. She grabbed my arm with her wet, shaking hands. She looked absolutely panicked. "Please, Julian, do not use those mushrooms," she whispered, her voice trembling with intense fear. "They are not safe. They are deeply sick. You must throw them into the fire." Her sudden interference in front of my silent staff made my blood boil with explosive, uncontrollable rage. I pushed her violently. She fell hard onto the wet floor. "You have no sense of taste," I shouted cruelly. "You are a useless dishwasher. You have absolutely no right to speak in my kitchen. Get back to the dark corner before I throw you out into the cold street." Part 2. The Midnight Saboteur. I ignored my mother's desperate warning completely. I began preparing my signature truffle sauce. I chopped the expensive mushrooms and cooked them slowly with rich cream and fresh herbs. The smell in the kitchen was incredibly strong. I was absolutely confident that my dish would impress the famous food critic. The cooking process required many hours of slow heat. I left the large pot of sauce to simmer on the stove. I locked the kitchen doors and went back to my luxury apartment to rest. I wanted to be perfectly energetic for the massive dinner service the next day. Late at night, I could not sleep. I opened the security application on my mobile phone. I wanted to check the cameras inside my empty restaurant. I looked at the dark screen. Suddenly, my heart skipped a beat. A small, dark shadow was moving quietly across the main kitchen floor. I zoomed in on the camera feed. It was Clara. She was not washing dishes. She walked directly toward my stove. I watched her open the heavy metal lid of my signature sauce pot. She pulled a small glass bottle from her pocket. The bottle contained a cloudy, gray liquid. She poured the strange liquid directly into my perfect sauce. She stirred the pot quickly and put the lid back on. I stared at my phone screen in pure, explosive anger. My own mother was actively sabotaging my masterpiece. She was trying to ruin the most important night of my career. I grabbed my car keys and drove wildly back to the restaurant. I broke the speed limits, my mind consumed by dark thoughts. I wanted to physically throw her out of the building. I arrived at the kitchen and unlocked the doors aggressively. The large room was completely empty. Clara was gone. I ran to the stove and opened the pot. The sauce looked exactly the same, but I knew she had poisoned it with her strange liquid. I picked up a silver spoon. I expected the sauce to taste bitter, salty, or completely ruined. I brought the spoon to my lips and tasted it. The flavor hit my tongue like an explosion. I closed my eyes in pure shock. The sauce was not ruined at all. In fact, it was absolutely incredible. The cloudy liquid had added a mysterious, brilliant herbal depth to the truffles. It was the most delicious thing I had ever cooked. My arrogant ego immediately took full credit for the beautiful taste. I convinced myself that my cooking methods were simply perfect. I believed the sauce was strong enough to overpower her stupid sabotage attempt. I decided to keep the sauce for the dinner service. It was too delicious to throw away. I smiled a cold, cruel smile. I planned to serve the perfect dish to the critic tomorrow. Then I would call Clara into the dining room. I would fire her publicly in front of all my staff. I was ready to banish my jealous, crazy mother from my perfect life forever. Part 3. The Fatal Drop. The next evening, my restaurant was packed with wealthy guests. The atmosphere was incredibly tense and exciting. The famous food critic arrived and sat at the best table in the center of the room. He wore an expensive suit and carried a small notebook. My entire future depended on his final review. I prepared his plate personally. I poured a generous amount of the rich, dark truffle sauce over a perfect piece of meat. I garnished the dish with delicate gold flakes. The presentation was an absolute masterpiece. I commanded my best waiter to serve the dish immediately. I watched from the kitchen door. The critic picked up his fork and knife. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. He took a large bite of the meat and the truffle sauce. He closed his eyes slowly. A smile of pure pleasure appeared on his face. He nodded his head in deep satisfaction. The flavor was perfect. I sighed with massive relief. I had won. My 3 Michelin stars were completely safe. But suddenly, the critic's smile vanished. His eyes opened wide in sudden, absolute terror. He dropped his silver fork onto the floor. He grabbed his throat with both hands, struggling violently to breathe. A loud, terrible choking sound escaped his lips. His face turned a dark, unnatural shade of purple. He fell out of his chair and crashed onto the hard floor. His body began to shake with violent convulsions. A dark stream of black blood poured from his mouth onto the clean white tiles. The restaurant erupted into total chaos. Wealthy guests screamed in panic and ran toward the doors. Waiters rushed to help the dying man on the floor. I stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, completely paralyzed by fear. My beautiful, perfect night had instantly turned into a horrific nightmare. Loud sirens wailed outside the building. Paramedics rushed into the dining room with heavy medical equipment. They placed the bleeding critic on a stretcher and carried him away to the hospital. Several police officers entered the restaurant immediately. They ordered everyone to stop moving. They sealed the building as a crime scene. A tall detective walked directly toward me. He asked what I had served the victim. I looked at the pot of truffle sauce. My heart hammered violently in my chest. If the sauce was poisoned, my career was completely over. I would lose my money, my stars, and my freedom. I would go to prison. In a moment of absolute cowardice, I made a terrible decision. I pulled my mobile phone from my pocket. I opened the security camera application. I showed the detective the video from the previous night. I showed him the dark shadow pouring a mysterious liquid into my cooking pot. That is the dishwasher. I told the detective with a perfectly straight face. Her name is Clara. She is a bitter, crazy old woman. She poured that unknown liquid into my sauce last night. I did not know it was poison. She tried to ruin my restaurant. She is the murderer. Part 4. The Unfilial Verdict. The police officers moved with aggressive speed. They drove directly to Clara's small, depressing apartment in the poorest part of the city. They kicked her fragile wooden door open. They found her sitting quietly on a cheap chair. They searched her tiny kitchen and found the empty glass bottle in the sink. The bottle still contained a few drops of the cloudy, gray liquid. The detectives collected it as the ultimate murder weapon. They pulled Clara out of her chair and locked heavy metal handcuffs around her thin wrists. They dragged my mother out into the dark street like a dangerous criminal. During the entire police interrogation, Clara remained completely silent. She did not cry, and she did not beg for mercy. She did not look surprised. When the detectives accused her of poisoning the famous food critic, she simply nodded her head. She asked for a pen and signed the written confession immediately. Her rapid confession closed the police investigation in record time. The detectives were happy, and the media went completely wild. I organized a massive press conference outside my closed restaurant. Dozens of reporters pointed bright cameras at my sad, dramatic face. I prepared to deliver the greatest performance of my life. I told the world a tragic, entirely fake story. I claimed I was the victim of severe psychological abuse. I said my mother was deeply jealous of my massive success. I told the cameras she hated my wealthy lifestyle because she was a failed, miserable woman. I painted her as an absolute monster. I had to protect my staff and my customers. I lied smoothly to the reporters, wiping a fake tear from my eye. I had no idea my own flesh and blood could be so evil. She wanted to destroy my life, but I will not let her win. I will rebuild this restaurant stronger than ever. The public reaction was incredibly supportive. Millions of people watched the news and felt deep sympathy for the brilliant, abused chef. My social media followers doubled overnight. Rich investors sent me flowers and messages of support. They called me a brave survivor. My dark lie had worked perfectly. I sat alone in my luxury penthouse, drinking a very expensive glass of red wine. I watched the news reports about Clara being transferred to a high-security prison. I did not feel a single drop of guilt or sadness. I believed I had successfully removed a dangerous, toxic problem from my perfect world. I thought I was incredibly smart. I thought I had tricked the entire universe. I celebrated my own cruel survival while my mother sat in a cold, dark cell. I was completely blind to the devastating, horrific truth that was about to explode directly into my arrogant face. Part 5. The Toxicology Report. A few days later, I was relaxing in my expensive living room. I was waiting for the city officials to unseal my restaurant. I was planning a massive, glorious reopening party. Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed from my front door. I opened it and saw a tired, serious man wearing a gray suit. "I am Inspector Thomas from the forensic laboratory," the man said coldly. "I need to speak with you immediately." He walked into my apartment without waiting for an invitation. He carried a thick brown folder. He threw the heavy folder onto my glass coffee table with a loud smack. I looked at him, feeling a sudden wave of nervous energy. "We finished the toxicology report on your mother's glass bottle," the inspector stated sharply. "We analyzed the cloudy liquid she poured into your sauce." I crossed my arms, trying to look confident. "Did you identify the poison?" I asked smoothly. The inspector looked at me with intense, burning disgust. "There was no poison in her bottle, Julian," he replied, his voice dripping with anger. "The liquid she poured was completely harmless. It was a simple mixture of licorice root, mint, and basic healing herbs. Your mother did not poison anyone." The room started to spin slowly. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The critic almost died. He vomited blood. If she didn't poison him, what did? The inspector opened the brown folder and pulled out a stack of complex medical documents. He pointed to a highlighted paragraph. The critic ingested a massive dose of a rare, necrotizing bacteria. The inspector explained grimly. "This specific bacteria destroys the stomach and causes severe internal bleeding in minutes. We tested the food samples from your kitchen. We found the exact source of the deadly bacteria." My breath caught painfully in my throat. The bacteria did not come from a mysterious bottle. The inspector continued, staring directly into my terrified eyes. "The bacteria grew naturally inside the expired white truffles you used. The mushrooms were completely rotten and highly toxic. You served them anyway." The horrific truth hit my mind like a speeding train. The sauce chef was absolutely right. The truffles were sick. My mother was absolutely right. The truffles were deeply dangerous. My massive, arrogant ego had ignored their desperate warnings. I had personally cooked a pot of deadly, bacterial poison. I fell backward onto my expensive sofa. I was the killer. I almost murdered a man because I believed my nose was perfect. I poisoned the critic, and then I falsely accused my own mother to save my miserable career. The beautiful, golden empire I built suddenly felt like a dark, dirty cage. Part 6. The Antidote. I stared at the medical documents, my hands trembling violently. If the cloudy liquid was just harmless herbs, why did she pour it? I whispered, completely confused by her actions. Why did she sneak into the kitchen at night to add it to the sauce? The inspector sighed heavily and sat down. We checked your mother's background, the inspector said softly. Before she became poor, Clara was not just a dishwasher. She was a highly respected practitioner of traditional Eastern medicine in her home village. She had an incredible, almost superhuman sense of smell and a deep knowledge of natural pharmacology. She smelled the truffles that morning, the inspector continued. Her trained nose instantly recognized the unique, sour scent of the deadly necrotizing bacteria. She tried to warn you, but you pushed her away. She knew you were too arrogant to listen. She knew you were going to serve the poison anyway. My heart hammered painfully against my ribs. So, she tried to stop me? I asked, tears forming in my eyes. The inspector shook his head. No, Julian. She tried to save you. She stayed awake all night in her tiny apartment. She used her ancient knowledge to brew a powerful, natural antidote. The cloudy liquid in the bottle was not a weapon. It was a desperate cure. She sneaked into your kitchen to pour the antidote directly into the toxic sauce. She wanted the herbs to neutralize the deadly bacteria before the food critic ate it. She was trying to silently fix your terrible mistake. The full weight of her incredible sacrifice began to crush my soul. The critic survived the dinner, the inspector stated, watching my tears fall. The hospital doctors were amazed. The bacteria dose was massive, but the poison was heavily neutralized. He lived specifically because your mother's herbal antidote weakened the toxins. My mother did not try to destroy my restaurant. She actively saved it. She saved the critic's life. She saved me from a guaranteed murder charge. She used her brilliant medical skills to clean up my toxic, arrogant mess in the dark. And I rewarded her by sending her to a dark prison. Why didn't she tell the police? I sobbed loudly, burying my face in my hands. Why did she sign the confession? The inspector looked at me with deep, profound pity. Because if she told the truth, you would go to prison for criminal negligence. She took the blame to protect her foolish son. I jumped up from the sofa. We have to get her out. I screamed frantically. You know the truth now. She is innocent. We have to go to the police station and release her immediately. I ran toward the door, desperate to fix my horrific betrayal. But the inspector did not move. Part 7. The Boiling Sip. The inspector stood up slowly. He did not look excited or relieved. He looked at me with an expression of absolute, freezing tragedy. Sit down, Julian. He commanded softly. We cannot release her from the police station. She is no longer in a jail cell. My heart stopped completely. What do you mean? I whispered, a cold terror gripping my entire body. Where is my mother? The inspector took a deep breath. Clara was transferred from the holding cell early this morning. He explained grimly. She was taken directly to the city hospital morgue. The words did not make sense. The morgue? I repeated, my brain refusing to process the information. She was fine yesterday. She just signed a piece of paper. How can she be dead? The inspector pulled a final piece of evidence from his brown folder. It was a flash drive. We recovered the complete security footage from your kitchen. The inspector said gently. You only showed the police the first half of the video. There was a blind spot in the corner of the room. The camera caught what she did after she poured the antidote into your pot. He plugged the flash drive into my television. The black and white video played on the large screen. I saw Clara pour the cloudy liquid. She stirred the thick, bubbling sauce. Then, she stepped back and looked at the pot. The sauce did not change color. It still looked exactly the same. Because the sauce didn't change, she became absolutely terrified. The inspector whispered over the video. She did not know if the herbal antidote was strong enough to neutralize the massive amount of bacteria. She was afraid the critic would still die, and you would still go to prison. I watched the screen in pure, suffocating horror. Clara picked up a large, white ceramic bowl. She dipped a metal ladle into the pot of boiling, toxic mushroom sauce. She filled the large bowl to the very top. Steam rose from the hot liquid. She did not hesitate for a single second. She lifted the heavy bowl to her lips. She drank the boiling, poison sauce completely. She swallowed every single drop of the deadly mixture. She used her own fragile, elderly body as a human poison tester. She wanted to measure the toxicity before she allowed you to serve it to a customer. The massive dose of remaining bacteria destroyed her internal organs slowly over the next 24 hours. She sat in the police interrogation room, bleeding internally, suffering unimaginable agony in complete silence. She died protecting the reputation of the monster who hated her. Part 8. The Secret of the Palate. I ran out of my apartment and drove my car like a madman. I broke every traffic law in the city. I arrived at the hospital morgue, my clothes soaked in cold sweat. I pushed past the doors and demanded to see her. A quiet doctor led me into a freezing, white room. Clara was lying on a cold steel table. Her skin was pale and covered in dark, purple bruises from the internal bleeding. The bacteria had completely melted her stomach and her intestines. She died in absolute, horrific pain. I fell to my knees, holding her cold, lifeless hand. I sobbed until my throat bled. I am a monster. I screamed into the silent room. I killed you. I am so sorry. I looked at her peaceful face. A painful question suddenly burned in my mind. If she was a brilliant medical healer, why did she completely lose her sense of taste? The forensic doctor standing nearby heard my desperate question. He walked over to a small metal desk. He picked up a worn, dirty notebook. The police found this hidden under her bed. The doctor said softly, "It is her personal diary. It explains exactly what happened to her taste buds 20 years ago." I took the notebook with shaking hands. I opened the old, yellow pages. I read her neat, careful handwriting. The secret from my childhood exploded in my mind. 20 years ago, I was a poor, ambitious culinary student. I bought cheap, rotten, and dangerous ingredients from the dark markets to practice my cooking. Julian brought home strange mushrooms and expired meat today. Clara wrote in the diary, "I know the food is dangerous, but he is so proud of his cooking. I cannot destroy his beautiful dream. I will test every single dish before he eats it himself. I will keep him safe." For many years, Clara secretly ate all my toxic, experimental failures. She swallowed spoiled fish, poisonous plants, and rotten vegetables. She absorbed all the dangerous microtoxins into her own mouth to protect my health. The continuous exposure to daily poison slowly, permanently burned her delicate taste buds away. She sacrificed her greatest medical gift to build my career. My famous, insured God's palate was not a divine miracle. My perfect tongue was built directly on top of her silent, agonizing suffering. She destroyed her own senses so I could taste the stars. And I punished her for it. Part 9. the psychosomatic verdict. The food critic eventually recovered in the hospital. The police officially cleared my name of all criminal charges. The media published the truth about the expired truffles and the software glitch, but they never knew the full story of Clara's sacrifice. To the public, I was still a lucky, brilliant chef. I organized a quiet, lonely funeral for my mother. There were no cameras and no wealthy guests. It was just me, standing in the rain, staring at a simple wooden coffin. The crushing guilt was an invisible mountain sitting on my chest. My soul was completely, irreversibly broken. A week later, I unlocked the doors to my famous restaurant. The kitchen was completely empty and dark. I put on my clean, white chef's coat. I walked to the stove, determined to honor her memory the only way I knew how. I wanted to cook the perfect mushroom sauce just for her. I used the safest, most expensive ingredients available. I measured the fresh cream and the perfect herbs. I stirred the pot with incredible care, crying silent tears into the boiling liquid. I wanted to create a masterpiece of pure love and ultimate sorrow. I poured the finished sauce into a small bowl. I picked up a silver spoon. I closed my eyes and brought the warm sauce to my lips. I expected to taste the rich, earthy magic of the forest. I expected to taste perfection. But the third, most devastating twist hit me immediately. I opened my eyes in absolute shock. The sauce tasted like plain, warm water. There was no flavor of mushrooms or cream. I grabbed a piece of raw garlic from the counter and chewed it quickly. It tasted like nothing. I grabbed a bright red, spicy chili pepper and bit it aggressively. My tongue felt the heat, but there was absolutely no taste. I grabbed a bottle of sour vinegar and drank it. Nothing. The horrifying reality paralyzed my brain. The doctors had checked my tongue yesterday. It was physically healthy. But the massive, unbearable psychological trauma of killing my mother had caused a severe psychosomatic reaction. My brain had completely, permanently shut down my taste nerves out of pure, crushing guilt. The universe had delivered the ultimate, perfect punishment. The famous chef with the $10 million tongue was officially dead. I had become exactly like the woman I despised. I was a chef with no taste. Part 10. Prisoner of the Kitchen. Many years have passed since that terrible night. My restaurant still holds its 3 Michelin stars. The dining room is always full of wealthy, laughing people. The world still calls me a culinary god. They praise my brilliant recipes and my flawless execution. They do not know the dark, miserable truth. I maintain my empire entirely through strict muscle memory and mechanical measurements. I use exact timers, precise scales, and chemical thermometers. I can cook a perfect steak blindly, relying entirely on the touch of my fingers and the heat of the fire. But I have not tasted a single drop of food in a decade. The public praise feels like a cruel, endless joke. The applause sounds like the rattling chains of a heavy prison. I walk through my beautiful dining room with a fake smile, accepting their compliments. But inside, I am completely empty. I am a hollow ghost wearing a white coat. Every single night, after the last customer leaves and the young cooks wash the floors, I stay alone in the dark kitchen. I walk to the exact same stove. I take out the fresh mushrooms, the cream, and the herbs. I cook the exact same signature sauce in absolute silence. I pour the rich, bubbling sauce into a small, chipped ceramic bowl. It is the old bowl Clara used to eat from in her dark corner. I sit on a small stool in the back of the kitchen. I look at the beautiful food, my eyes red and burning with heavy tears. I pick up a spoon and bring it to my mouth. I swallow the sauce, hoping for a miracle. I pray to taste just one tiny hint of salt or earth. But it is always the same. It tastes like warm, empty water. The flavor is permanently locked away in a world I cannot reach. I cry silently in the dark. I hold the chipped bowl against my chest, whispering apologies to an empty room. Then I stand up and walk to the sink. I pour the perfect, 3-star sauce directly down the dirty drain. I wash the bowl slowly, feeling the cold water on my hands. I dry the bowl with a clean towel. I turn off the kitchen lights and walk out into the cold night. I am not a king anymore. I am just a prisoner locked forever inside a tasteless hell, serving a lifetime sentence for the crime of absolute, unforgivable arrogance.